Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar, Product Tips and Tricks. We're going to wait a minute or two for others to join. So for those of you who are already out there, I'd love to hear where you're joining us from. So maybe just give us a shout out in the chat. Really appreciate you being here. Yeah, I should say, I'm joining you from Denver, Colorado. Well, awesome. We're going to go ahead and get started now. So once again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to focus on sharing some Valimail product tips and tricks. I'm Wendy Bloechle, the Director of Product Marketing here at Valimail, and I'll be your host. Over the next, I'd say about 45 minutes, we'll be talking about a few interesting DMARC related stats, the DMARC journey, and share some tips and tricks for our two solutions, Monitor and Enforce. Today, we're joined by two resident experts we have at Valimail, Al Iverson, who is our expert in email marketing and deliverability. He'll be sharing some interesting trends in DMARC. In addition, we've got Kenneth Schwartzman. He's our expert in DMARC and email authentication. He'll be talking about the DMARC journey and sharing the product tips and tricks. Sorry, trick is hard to say. Tips and tricks. Before we get started, there's just a couple of things I want to tell you so you can get the most out of this webinar. So our speakers are happy to answer questions about their content. So please, add your questions to the Q&A box, which I believe is like down at the bottom of your screen or maybe the top, depending on how your Zoom is set up. But they're happy to answer questions about their content or their areas of expertise. We'll also email everyone a link to rewatch the webinar afterwards. And lastly, if you have time at the end, we'd so appreciate you filling out a survey. It helps us improve and get better, and would love your feedback. So in case you have any latecomers, we're just getting started. Just welcome to our webinar. And before we dig in, I just want to tell you a little bit about Valimail, and then I'm going to pass it over to Al. So our sole focus is on DMARC and email authentication. And our solutions are really about helping you get to DMARC enforcement as quickly as possible and keeping you there through continuous protection. We're really proud of our customer success, and you can see some of the examples of companies we help protect. We're also really committed to this industry. So you'll see that we participate in a lot of industry committees, as well as that we really want to build strong partnerships. And so we work with companies like Microsoft, End of Normal. So just wanted to let you know a little bit about ourselves. So I'm excited to get started. I'm going to send it over to Al.
Thank you, Wendy. Hi, everybody. Al Iverson here. Let's take a few minutes to talk about DMARC, growth trends, or even what is it? Why don't we start there? Let me give you 60 seconds, a 60-second description of what is DMARC. Email authentication is a way to prove that mail from your domain is actually coming from you, or a server authorized by you, or some sort of entity or service authorized by you. A couple different ways to do that with domain keys identified mail, that's DKIM, and SPF, Sender Policy Framework. So those are sort of the core of validating that the email you send is truly coming from you and not a spoof or coming from somebody else who's not actually you. Now, sort of the cherry on the top of that email authentication sundae is DMARC, and that's domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance. What DMARC is a domain policy setting. It is the policy component of email authentication. It lets you protect your domains against phishing and spoofing. What I mean by policy is that it lets you publish a policy, publish instructions to tell mailbox providers and internet service providers to reject your mail if it doesn't authenticate properly. Basically what it does is it's a, hey, you kids, get off my lawn setting. And it's a very important one at that. And that if you have DMARC set up properly, set up with a strong policy to protect your domain, it makes it near useless for bad guys to try to spoof your domain. there's always little edge cases and weird stuff, and not every mailbox provider in the world respects a DMARC policy and rejects mail upon request. But it is many of them do, and it's a very important measure rather to help prevent phishing and spoofing from having any sort of success. And it can be a little confusing too. There's some administrative overhead. You've got to be sure that all of the mail you send legitimately authenticates. If you don't, you could accidentally tell the world to reject your legitimate mail. And then there's some scale associated with that too. The bigger you are, the more overhead it could take to align your DMARC policy to manage this process across the many different brands or domains you might have. And these areas where it starts to get tricky, you don't know what you're doing, you need help with the administrative overhead, with the scale factor involved, need automation to help with that. That's where Valimail comes in. That's really our area of expertise. Specifically, we are DMARC experts and we can help. And so if you have any questions, and if this is all clear as mud to you and you really want somebody to walk you through it, follow up with us. We're here to help. So why is email authentication so important? First of all, it is because it was told. We were told that email authentication is required, right? DMARC was one of the specific requirements published by Yahoo and Google in a new set of updated sender requirements late last year, I think October 2023. Their first deadline there was, I think, around February 1st, where senders sending more than X messages a day, I think it was the number was 5,000, had to have not only SPF and DKIM, but also had to have a DMARC record published for their domain as well. So that's first thing there. It's necessary from a compliance and deliverability success perspective. Don't get me wrong, DMARC does not guarantee inbox delivery. Email authentication does not guarantee inbox delivery, but it is a strong component of deliverability success. You are not going to get your email delivered successfully without all of these mechanisms set up, configured, and working properly. Again, there's additional considerations. It's not a license to spam. Mailbox providers are still very sensitive to trying to understand which mail their subscribers want and don't want. And authentication is only a little piece of that. There's still engagement, complaint rates, and a whole bunch of other things that we could go on into depth and turn this into a deliverability webinar, but we're not going to do that.
Hey,
So
Al,
beyond,
sorry,
go ahead.
before you go on, there was a question about when or if Microsoft will have a similar requirement.
When will Microsoft get on the bus is how I framed that. And they did say earlier this year that they believe that they are going to, at some point, implement similar requirements. They didn't put a hard date on it, and they did not offer up that they're just, 6 revisions away from having this implemented. It's top priority for them. There's none of that, unfortunately. It's all about, as I put it, even if we hadn't talked to them about it, and we did talk to them about it on a webinar, and you can find more of that info about that on our blog, where that was one of the specific questions we asked. But even if we hadn't, I would still be saying Microsoft is going to get there anyway, because it is the natural evolution of inbound spam filtering best practices. If you want to keep the bad stuff out, this is the way to do it. This is how best practices have evolved. There is no other path that doesn't involve doing this, in my opinion. So yes, Microsoft will get there at some point, but how quickly? Honestly, we don't know. It's really on them to decide what their priority is with regard to when they're going to update filters so that they work in a method very similar to what Yahoo and Google have done. So it'll come, it'll happen, but I can't tell you when. Now, beyond the deliverability concerns there, the security concerns, right? That was the whole purpose initially for DMARC, was to protect people from phishing and spoofing. In this case, here's a perfect example of that. When earlier this year, I think it was back in May, the US government put out a report saying that North Korea was engaging in spear phishing. What that is very targeted phishing, fake spoofed emails sent to very specific people, often on an individual basis, to try to trick them into giving up information. In North Korea's case, it's all about their sphere of influence in the world. So they were trying to fake their way into inboxes of people who study North Korea, whether that be universities, whether government agencies, think tanks or whatever, anybody who had some sort of connection to that sort of East Asian sphere of influence, North Korea was looking for domains used by people in that sphere who were not protecting their domain properly with DMARC. People that had implemented a DMARC policy of P equals none, meaning no protection. That meaning that the domain was able to be spoofed. So North Korea's goal there was to gather intelligence, learn more about how their adversaries viewed them, to find information relative to their sphere of influence in the world. Now, it doesn't mean that North Korea is going to spoof or phish my neighborhood coffee shop or an online shoe retailer. But what happens here is bad guys look to other bad guys for inspiration and learning. And so people look at this and go, oh, here is a pretty simple exploit that I can do to pretend to be these other domains. What can I get from that? And that's what leads to other types of phishing and spoofing, leading to what we would commonly think of as BEC, business enterprise compromise. What the kind of stuff where you trick the accounting department into setting up a direct deposit to the wrong account, that sort of thing. So it's an important thing to remember that North Korea is not the only entity doing this. This is just one that was doing it so greatly as to be noticed by the government enough to put out a notice about it. And then finally, email authentication can have its own issues along the way. There is one implementation in particular of a particular MTA, mail server vendor, that implemented this L tag as part of their DKIM configuration. And one email service provider who was signing all of their outbound mail with an L tag in a way that meant that bad guys could take the message, change out body copy, resend it, and have it still authenticate, pass DKIM checks, pass DMARC, and basically allowing a bad guy to serve up their content, but with your domain, and allowing them to get to the inbox based on your domain reputation until they wreck your domain reputation, because their mail is not going to be wanted. It's going to get higher spam complaints, and it's going to get negative votes against your domain. It's going to wreck your deliverability. So it's always important to stay on top of security issues around email authentication. There's all these things. Every once in a while, somebody says, oh my God, I got a spoof from company X and it was really from company X. And so obviously DMARC is broken and nobody should use it. And that's a load of baloney. It really is. You got to remember that DMARC is just one bit of security, right? If you think of locking your door, I think if DMARC helps you lock your door, doesn't mean a bad guy couldn't still get in through the window. So DMARC helps you lock the door, but what else are you doing to lock the window as well, right? If somebody can get your account password and you don't have two-factor turned on, or you don't have other security measures turned on, DMARC is not alone going to protect somebody from getting into that account and being able to send an email as you. So it's always important to remember that DMARC is a very important piece of security strategy, but it is not the only thing out there, the only thing that you use to secure your data and secure your email. DMARC is growing. I have been tracking month by month DMARC adoption numbers. I have this data set that I lovingly refer to as the top 10 million domains. And to try to avoid the perception of vendor bias here, what I did is I went online. There's different sites that publish these lists of domains. There's a company called host.io is one of those, and they publish a list every month of the top 10 million domains. They've ranked it by web traffic, so it's not exactly perfect for email use because it's not email ranking, but it is there's kind of a good rough correlation there between it is a highly ranked domain by web traffic, meaning it's a fairly well-known or important brand, people are visiting it, and probably there's some email associated with some number of these domains, quite a few of them actually, and so they're domains that should be protected. And when I look at this, they're not all protected. So there's either the glass half full or the glass half empty way to look at it. And that right now, we're at about just over 20% adoption of DMARC across this swath of the top 10 million domains. That's very good, and that it's grown significantly, going all the way back as far as I'm tracking it here, right? It's really significantly grown, and it's great to see that there's this broad 20% adoption rate just specific to this data set. Keeping in mind too that this is not the only list of domains in the world that somebody can come up with and look at percentages of DMARC implementation. Somebody might have their own list or their own way of tracking it, but again, I tried to do this in a way that is sort of vendor neutral. It's just a snapshot of a slice of the internet trying to aim toward more popular domains. Last thing I'll say about this here is you can see when did DMARC take off at the start of the year, right between January and February there, right? There's that significant bump. That's all thanks to Yahoo and Google. That aligns perfectly with the first deadline there in February 2024 when DMARC was required by Yahoo and Google. So it's great to see that there's a whole bunch of people who never thought of DMARC before who are now thinking about DMARC. That comes to the flip side. Now I'll jump back to pessimistic mode, back to glass half empty mode. And a lot of this new implementation of DMARC is P equals none, meaning a policy setting of do not protect my domain. That's the biggest bit of the chart here on the bottom bit of each of these columns, and that's a bit of a bummer to see. That tells us that we have a ways to go here to help encourage folks here to protect their domain against phishing and spoofing for reasons like I talked about, for reasons like North Korea there. So it's great that a lot of these people implemented it because Yahoo and Google told them, but they only did exactly what Yahoo and Google told them, and I think you might actually see in the future that Yahoo and Google might come up with updated requirements that drive people to put in a more protective DMARC policy. And finally, just last night, Google, about 4 p.m. Central yesterday, Google announced support for common mark certificates, or CMCs. This is something that goes along with BIMI, brand indicators for message identification. BIMI is a logo standard by which senders use it to display a logo next to their messages, different webmail clients, mobile applications, and email reading applications. We feel very strongly that BIMI helps boost engagement. It's one of those things where BIMI has been tough to test because of the way it's implemented. It's not very easy to do an A/B head-to-head test, but a lot of the clients we've talked to, and going all the way back to Yahoo's initial tests with BIMI logos, they seem to boost engagement. So what they are is they are the carrot to go with the stick of email authentication. The stick being the need to protect yourself against domain phishing and spoofing. The carrot, the happy reason to do it, is that if you implement DMARC properly and securely, you are eligible to set up a BIMI logo. People that implement BIMI logos, to be able to do that, you have to have your domain policy for DMARC set to reject or quarantine, meaning you have to have your domain at a protected level, to a significant level there, before you're eligible to install a BIMI logo. Now, the BIMI logo implementation of it at its broadest support requires this thing called a verified mark certificate. You purchase it from a certificate authority or SSL vendor. There's a couple of them. We partner with DigiCert for those certificates. And that was a barrier to entry for a lot of folks, in that it requires a trademarked logo. So if you wanted to properly implement BIMI before yesterday and wanted it to display as many ISPs as possible, you needed to have this verified mark certificate. Well, what Google announced yesterday is that they will accept VMC or CMC. What's different with this common mark certificate is that it doesn't require a trademarked logo. You only, instead, you have to demonstrate that this mark or logo has been in use on your website for at least 12 months. And believe it or not, the vendors, the CAs, are going to use the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine to determine that, which tickles me to no end. But the important thing here is that one of the barriers has been bypassed. You don't have to have a trademarked logo. That'll help for folks that are just too small. You still need to have a company. You're still going to need to be verified by the certificate authority. But if you're too small to have a trademarked logo, or you're in a region that isn't supported under VMC, VMC's trademark mechanisms only work basically, I think, in 13 different regions around the world, not everywhere. So CMC is another way to do that. So if you implement a CMC logo with BIMI, you can now you get that logo showing up and at Gmail, probably at Yahoo as well. It's not 100% coverage, but if you're a B2C marketing center, that is significant. The two of those together, that's probably more than 2/3 of your subscriber base where you can now show off a shiny logo next to your email messages. There's a lot more to come on this. A bunch of us were surprised at the timing of the Google announcement yesterday. Other vendors involved, I'm sure, were surprised as well. So everybody's rushing to check paperwork and set everything up. We are good to go from perspective of our Amplify product. We have CMC support in there already, but it'll take a little time before the certificate authorities are ready to actually start issuing those CMCs. So stay tuned. I think it's very likely that we will have a follow-up webinar talking about this more specifically. And should we answer, anybody have any BIMI questions that we should answer before we run away from this, Wendy?
Yes, we did have one question come in about, is it possible to implement a BIMI logo on a subdomain, which is at reject or quarantine, when the top level domain is at P equals none?
It is not. That is one of the requirements of the BIMI specification, is that your organizational domain, which I often sort of wrongly call the top level domain. I think it might be better called like the apex level for the domain. That has to be at quarantine or reject.
Great. Keep the questions coming. We have time at the end for that. But now we're going to pass it over to Kenneth.
Yeah, so I'm Kenneth. I'm the director of the sales engineering team here at Valimail. And I've also worked with the product support team doing the onboardings for quite a few of our customers. So I'm going to talk about the journey to DMARC enforcement. And a lot of that is, just to kind of touch back on some of the stuff I saw in the chat. But again, be sure to put those in the Q&A so I don't miss them later, because I can't see the chat sometimes. But the journey to DMARC enforcement really is two pieces, or maybe three. One is being aware of DMARC. The second is like doing something about it. And a third is what we call getting to enforcement. And really the most important part about that is staying at enforcement. What this means is, most of you are aware of DMARC, which is why you're here and why you're learning about it. And some of those graphs and things that Al was talking about, the most important part is just starting the journey, putting in a policy where you're saying, you're at P equals none, which means you're just getting reports, but you also have a reporting address. And we have a free tool to allow you to collect the reports, which I'm about to talk about. But then what happens is the ultimate goal, like Al mentioned, is to get to enforcement, to stay there. And what you're doing with that is you're telling a receiver, hey, if you get a message purportedly from my domain and it doesn't pass authentication, my policy is telling you to quarantine it or to reject it. Both of those are considered enforcement. But what you're telling that receiver is, including your own receiver, if you get something from me that's not authentic, don't put it in the inbox. I don't want users interacting with that possibly fraudulent message, or maybe it's shadow IT. But it's a never-ending tedious cycle if you try to do it yourself. It's possible, but that's part of the reason we were created and why we came up with our tools, because you can do this, but it's a lot of manual DNS updates. DNS is fragile, as everybody knows. Usually there's a change window. You need to be very aware of what's going on with your SPF record. There's some old limitations in the spec. And so that you have to make sure that as you update things and you're identifying the services correctly, that you're staying under the SPF lookup limit. Then you need to make sure that you even have the right sender stuff in there from each sender that you use. And then reconfigure your DNS, stay on top of it in case things are changing on the vendor side. And it's just this never-ending tedious cycle. Again, it is possible. We do scan 70+ million DNS records a day. So we do see like a success rate of people doing it themselves. It's about 20% success rate. And as the orgs grow, that could be, it could take quite a long time, right? We've seen people, it takes them 12 months. And again, they roll back, and rolling back means maybe they made a mistake and they have to go back to reporting mode and then go back to enforcement. We have other vendors in the space. Obviously, we're biased. We'd like you to use us if possible. You have a higher success rate if you do go with like a consultative approach. But again, it's not ideal. It still takes a lot of time. We have a lot of people who've come to us from other vendors who were having problems. And so with us, with our automation, we have a very high success rate of getting people to enforcement. It's about a 95% success rate. We have new customers all the time, which is usually what that little delta is. But the way it works in general from a high level view is like Al mentioned, you want to make sure anything that you officially use is authenticated. In our platform, we call that a configuration. We just enable that configuration. So on the left side, for example, you enable the corporate mail you use, and we're agnostic as to whatever you use. So if it's Google, O365, on-prem, et cetera, we just click that in the enablement in the configuration. That's considered good mail. And if you're pointing to us on the paid solution, which I'll talk about briefly in a little bit, we answer the authentication request for you. No emails flowing through us. We don't want your email. This is all based off DMARC aggregate reports. And you're not giving us your DNS. We don't want your DNS either. You're pointing to us in very particular ways so we can answer this authentication piece. So that, again, if it's the corporate message or payroll, right, or DocuSign, we'll respond with the authentication request that goes right to the inbox, and people can interact with it. But if it's something like shadow IT or a fraudster, someone impersonating the domain, when it hits the receiver, it's going to still do that check and it's going to come to us, but we're going to say, well, that sender is not authenticated. Your policy is saying at that point, again, hey, if you get a message from me and it's not authenticated, my policy is to reject it. Don't even accept it at the server level. And that's the strictest level. So we want to make sure that gets in there, or, that message does not hit the inbox and interact with users, right? We don't want people interacting with those. Our goal is to never block good email. So moving on from this, what can we do to help you all? And so that's part of the value of our solutions. And so what I'm going to do right now is dive into this, just some terminology that I'm about to use. The first piece is going to be from Monitor. Monitor is, we named this intentionally, right? That's the step that you take when you start your DMARC journey. You need to see who is sending is you. This is free to sign up and use. We're going to have a link later on how to do this. We take a services-based approach, which I'm about to show you. We want to be able to show you who's sending is you, whether you're aware of it or not, like Google Workspace or Microsoft O365. It's much easier to talk about the services as opposed to going to you or having a UI say, do you use 192.258.3.5? I don't know, but do you use O365 from Microsoft? That's much easier to have that discussion. You get a global view of all the traffic sent on behalf of your domains. And again, it can be sending from anywhere. Sometimes people don't realize what sending is them. But the other thing that you'll see shortly is that we break all this down in a DMARC authentication, if it's failing or passing. And in order to, I'll talk about this a little bit more about the specifics of what's needed to pass or fail. But again, we're only using DMARC aggregate reports. There's no risk of PII. I've already mentioned that no mail is flowing through us. And you can add all your domains, including the defensive ones that aren't supposed to be sending, but it's usually enlightening to see if someone is trying to use that to send. And on top of that, we have alerts, and we have examples of alerts that we'll show you after I do a demo. The other piece of this is the paid solution. So in case you are ready to continue your journey and get to DMARC enforcement and stay there, that's when you'll see the real value of the benefits. So it's the same thing as Monitor. You still get all the charts and the services-based views, but it's technology driven. It's using our patented technology to directly address the SPF lookup limit, to enable the senders with one click. We can diagnose failing services. Again, no PII, there's no changes needed as far as like needing you to tweak things. If you go to the paid solution, you do point DMARC, SPF, and DKIM to us in a very particular way on the paid solution versus the free one. But we're happy to talk about that over the phone and I'll do a brief demo on what this entails if you want to use this, but we're happy to talk to you about this. And again, there's more alerts on the paid solution. There's including other tools like organizing things in a portfolio. So I'll probably just go ahead and dive in right now and show you what it looks like. So let me go ahead and share my screen. There should be a world map. Wendy, give me a thumbs up if it shows up, please, so I know to continue. All right. So I am going to be showing both the paid and the free solution all in one in my demo account. So I will call out where certain things are visible in Monitor versus Enforce. So let's talk about Monitor. You would have the dashboard as well. So once you point to us and we start collecting those DMARC aggregate reports based on behalf of your domains, then we can surface up things like suspicious mail or the total volume of mails. We have deliverability reports. We can break down the senders in your domains. And again, I mentioned that you can have multiple domains in the account. On the paid solution, you can also organize those into portfolios. I'll come back into that. But in the monitor piece, again, you can have multiple domains. So you can see I have a bunch of them in here, .examples. We have customers who have hundreds and thousands of domains. We can handle the volume. So the idea with this, though, is, again, for the free tier, turn the lights on. What does that look like? You point DMARC to us. We give you a very specific record. You're at P equals none. So we're not blocking anything or telling people to, reject your mail. It's just, again, the reporting piece. And what does that look like? It's this typically. It is the authentication report. And what we do is surface up the service is sending as your domain. Now, this is a very high volume example, but we see this across the board. It can be, you may just have one service, but you may have some unidentified senders. Unidentifieds are typically the spoof, et cetera. But it just takes one message to show up in our UI, and that's what we surface up. So for this particular company, they have a lot of transactional volume based off SendGrid. And when they were trying to DIY this themselves, they were missing some of the corporate travel, right? This BCD travel, which only sends, a message a day, for example. But again, it's much easier to surface this up to you to say, oh, we see Qualtrics sending as you and it's passing, as opposed to something like NAC, which is failing. Now, for this company in particular, this is kind of interesting because NAC leverages SendGrid under the hood. And so when they were trying to DIY this, and nothing wrong with DIYing, we want everybody to be at DMARC enforcement, but there was a mistake they were making because they didn't realize that some systems power the other ones under the hood. We can recognize that. We can identify thousands and thousands of sending services, more than any of the other ones in the space. So again, turn the lights on. Let's show you what's passing or failing. And if something isn't in use, this is easy for you to have the conversation with. So again, this company, NAC, was shadow IT. They don't actually use it. They don't use DigitalOcean, so they don't want it to pass. Shadow IT and some potential spoof. So that's usually how the free tier works. There are alerts. So if a new service popped up here, they would see those. But the way it works to transition to the paid solution is based off that configuration I was talking about. So let's say this company were ready to move forward. They would point, they've already pointed DMARC to us. They would, during an onboarding phase in a very particular order, start to look with us at these services. And all we really need is a yes or no answer if the service is in use. We designed this to be low tech lift, low tech touch, so that all you have to do, and a lot of this is automatically done in the UI, is simply do that one-click enablement. So imagine on that previous page, if ADP showed up. ADP is a popular payroll service. If we were onboarding and said, and this domain had our SPF record in place, and we said, do you use ADP? And the answer is yes, then it's very easy for either you to log in or to work with our support team during onboarding to do this for you. So I've already mentioned we can identify thousands and thousands of sending services. We know which ones are capable of sending right out of the box. So we would just simply add that system. We also recommend that you put in metadata, because this is a one-stop shop in a way for you to enable your services. You don't need to go back and forth to your DNS with a few rare exceptions, but you can say, okay, this is owned by Pat Payroll. And for those of you in larger organizations, you can even add the ticket numbers just so you have a reference for this. You would add the service. And once it's there, the way this works with our patented solution is that the very next message that goes out from ADP as this domain, when it has our SPF record in place, what we do is we leverage macros from the SPF spec with the technology and the platform to provide what is called an instant SPF or targeted SPF response. In short, what we do is, in this case, we're only answering with what's needed for ADP, and that's it. We don't have the full list of SPF records. And those of you who are familiar with this know that you can have this like giant, text string, right? We only want to address what's being queried for. And if ADP is no longer in use, for example, then we would just simply disable it. If you said, oh, we know Valimail detected it, but we migrated off of that, 6 months ago, let's make sure it's not on. We would just disable that. The other piece of this is the DKIM. And one of the things that I just want to remind everybody, because Al was talking about this at the start of the webinar, in order to pass DMARC, so like in that bar chart that I was showing with the services, you need to pass and authenticate SPF or DKIM or both for the spec. Certain services do one or the other. We can, you may not need to be in the weeds. If you want to, we're happy to share that detail, but the app can tell you this. So if I add a system like Marketo up here, that would take care of the SPF piece, but towards the bottom, there'd be a warning, and we would want to make sure that DKIM is enabled for that particular service. So there would be a warning here, and you could see, oh, Marketo supports DKIM, but we haven't detected a key yet. We'd walk you through how to enable that, and we would simply add the DKIM key here. Again, this is part of the paid solution. This is all part of the onboarding, which we are happy to, we have all levels of customers who, some want to do this themselves, others want them to have us interact with them in the system. We're happy to do that. But the idea is that as we add those DKIM keys and enable the systems that you officially use, they move over from failing to passing. And that's when we make the recommendation to say, it looks like next week you're going to be ready for enforcement. Maybe you need to do some internal communication, et cetera, and set up some policies about what to do if I don't know, like a marketing consultant comes in and fires off a service without telling anybody. This gives you that power to do that. But when you're ready, we move you to enforcement through the UI. We would change the policy up here. And our goal is to never block good email. We're not going to rush you. We will, make sure you stay on this road and get there. But again, we don't want to block good email. We want to make sure everything that you say you use is officially in use and authenticating. And that's part of the magic. Once you're there, once you're at enforcement, you are telling those receivers, if you get something that's not authentic from me, please don't put it in the inbox. And then the other piece of that I mentioned, it's the big key of this is staying at enforcement. We won't have to have you roll back. If any of these vendors make changes, part of our service identification program, we can tell what these are, automatically adjust for you. So that's the paid solution in a nutshell. There are tons of additional features that I haven't touched on. So there's reports, for example. We have, if you're in a larger organization and you want to have more information about like your DKIM key ages, and maybe you need to rotate those, or want to rather, we can help you with that. One of the key things that we mentioned before, and we'll show you some examples in a second, are alerts. So if a new service pops up, or if someone inadvertently makes a change to your SPF record, we would alert you on that. We have a new tool called an email analyzer report. This is available for those of you who want to send in a test message right from a system that you've just enabled, just to verify that it works. Happy to talk about this more at length. And then the last piece that I'll talk about before I go back to the slides is really the piece about BIMI that Al mentioned. BIMI is part of our product suite. So if those of you who are interested in it, you do need to be at full enforcement. I say org domain, but correct me whatever the term is. The whole domain needs to be locked down. If you have an open subdomain somewhere, or the org domain, the top level domain is still P equals none, that doesn't mean you're at enforcement. So when we say we get people to enforcement, we have everything covered, including the subdomains. I kind of glossed over that on the configuration page, but we handle all the subdomain reports. Those are additional features that can pop up. If you need just simple ones like, hey, we only use this one for this particular service, that's fine. Or some of you may be from a university where you have very advanced subdomain usage, like lawschool.university.edu, and you just want that team to see that one subdomain. We can support all of that through the teams and portfolios. Apologies for going over this fast. There's just so much stuff in here that, I just want to make sure that we're leaving time for the questions and stuff that are come up. But again, with the BIMI, once you're at enforcement, as we're onboarding you, the way it typically works is we have you point BIMI to the platform. We have you create a BIMI record. We go out, like Al mentioned, through our partner and get the certificate for you. We have a number of organizations that do have trademark logos currently. But the exciting news is what happened last night, the new CMCs, which you do need to show that you've used ownership of the logo that's out. But that should be ready very shortly, and we're going to have blog updates. We'll probably do another webinar, so please stay tuned. But let me go ahead and stop sharing so we can get back to the webinar. And bare minimum, please feel free to sign up for Monitor. If those of you who are just starting your journey, you can continue to do this. We're not going to interrupt if you're doing this yourselves or using another tool. You can use us at the same time. We want to show you that services-based view and to show you what sending is you. Just real quickly, some of the alerts that can be set up, especially on the free tier that you see here. If a rate changes, so if something stops passing, that would be an alert. A new service that I mentioned, the suspicious volume. Suspicious is really good to use because it's a reminder of the security initiative behind this. I know some people, they're only here for deliverability, or other people are only here for this other reason. But this is all encompassing. They all go together. See what's going on as the suspicious sending volume, so you can remind the organization of, yeah, we're being spoofed. This is why this is important. And then on the paid solution, we have even more of these. So if a policy changes, like one of your teammates accidentally clicks the wrong button, we have executive reports that go out, which I like to use. So that shows me every month my personal domains, what's going on with those, the new service detected, et cetera. And again, the suspicious. It's always interesting to see, even though my own domains and our company domains are at enforcement, there are always kind of waves coming through, and it's just like a constant reminder of like why enforcement is necessary. Yeah, so these are other drilled in views of the alerts. So we'd love for you all to play with these and let us know what you think.
Yeah, it's basically meant to show once you pick which alert you want, all you do is you add your email, select the domain that you want the alert for, and then this is an example of what it would look like. So just want to encourage you to use those, as Kenneth mentioned. They've got a lot of value. So let's see, it looks like we've got 4 minutes left. So I would love for us to take some questions. I'm going to take the first one. So someone asked if the session is recorded and will be shared afterwards. The answer is yes. We will send out a link to the recording. Al, I have one for you. Is there only one VMC provider currently?
So the provider of VMCs or CMCs, they are referred to as certificate authorities, or I sort of fumble that and call them SSL vendors sometimes. I think that might be a bit reductive. They'd probably get mad at me. But there are, generally speaking, 2 of them today that sell VMCs. That's DigiCert and Entrust. We suspect it's the same 2 that are going to be selling CMCs, DigiCert for sure, and I assume Entrust. Right now, those are the only 2 certificate authorities doing that. I would be surprised if it's only 2 forever, though. I bet there'll be more coming in the future.
Great, thank you, Al. And Kenneth, someone was asking about consulting services. Maybe you could talk a little bit about our support and what we do to help customers get onboarded. And
yeah, so we'd be happy to address that. If you want to email us after you sign up, we'd love for you to sign up as well, so we can see what's going on. But as far as services go, we have everything from like DIY. We have people we have an amazing product support team that is there to onboard you. We have everything from technical account management pieces for large organizations, all the way down to people who are like, hey, don't even talk to me. I want to be the one to log in and click the buttons and I'll read the articles. So we can support all of those and anything in between. So I'm sure we can meet in the middle to whatever you need, whoever asks that question. I'm trying to go through that to see the thing, but yes.
Yeah. And actually, there was a question specifically about Monitor. So we have a user who is looking at the report that basically says, is your mail being delivered? And it shows that 60% of his emails are allowed through, no enforcement, versus about 40% are allowed through with enforcement. So is that something we can help? Like, what do we mean when we say enforcement there?
Yeah, so enforcement typically means I need to see the example, and so whoever wrote that, please feel free to write in, and we'd be happy to jump on a call with you. I think we have an email address here somewhere.
It's right here.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Yeah. But in general, what it means is if your domain is at enforcement or a subdomain is at enforcement, what it usually is reporting is that here are the messages that made it through. If there's something that is like spoof, for example, the receiver is reporting back to saying like, hey, I got some of your messages, the ones that are authenticated are delivered and at enforcement. The other ones, like allowed no enforcement, could be what are called DMARC overrides, where they intentionally let it in, or you could be at P equals none, which means that the service failed, but it still got delivered. So it's a more complex answer. I'm going kind of quickly, but the answer is it kind of depends on the policy and what was being sent out. But if you're at P equals none, they're going to warn you through these reports to say like, hey, this made it through, but it's not at enforcement. That's usually what we're referring to with that.
Thanks,
So
Kenneth.
again, just as a touch base in general, whenever we say enforcement, it means a quarantine or a reject. Both of those are considered enforcement for DMARC.
Excellent.
P equals none is a reporting only mode.
So we're pretty much, yeah, we are out of time. So I just want to share these resources with you. We will send them to you. If you asked a question, we will follow up with you. So I'm sorry we didn't, have more time for questions. But I do want to encourage you, if you don't have Monitor, it's free to sign up, free to use. I have the link here. It's on our website as well. We have a great blog, and Al actually has additional information on the growth data that he talked about earlier there. And on any blog post, you could sign up for our monthly newsletter just to stay in tune with what's going on in the industry. And as Kenneth mentioned, if you have specific questions about your data, we would definitely be happy to set up a personalized demo and review that with you together. And you can email us at productinfo@valimail.com. I really appreciate you guys joining us. I thank Al and Kenneth for your expertise and information. And I hope you guys have a great day.